Oh, I forgot to talk about this thing. Here's Bill Clinton saying some insane Jeffrey Epstein's bestie.
Let me talk about the hardest issue here in Michigan is the Middle East. And I have to be careful what I say because there's only one president at a time, and none of us can get ahead of where we're going. But I think we're going to have to essentially start again on the peace process. And I understand why young Palestinian and Arab Americans in Michigan think too many people have died. I get that. But if you lived in one of those kibbutzim in Israel, right next to Gaza, where the people there were the most pro-friendship with Palestine, most pro-two-state solution of any of the Israeli communities, were the ones right next to Gaza. And Hamas butchered them. And so then the people who criticize it are essentially saying, yeah, but look how many people you've killed in Ritalin. So how many is enough for you to kill to punish them for the terrible things they did? That all sounds nice until you realize, what would you do if it was your family and you hadn't done anything but support a homeland for the Palestinians, and one day they come for you and slaughter the people in your village? You would say, well, you'll have to forgive me, I'm not keeping score that way. It isn't how many we've had to kill, because Hamas makes sure that they're shielded by civilians. They'll force you to kill civilians.
Yeah, I mean, the same principle goes for Israel, by the way, if that's the case. But of course, nobody ever thinks about it like that. Nobody ever says like, oh, the kibbutz are actually human shields, you know? And here's the reason. It's because a lot of these people just simply don't see people from the MENA region as human beings. So like, this is such a genuinely held principle for someone like Bill Clinton and many others in positions of power. And that makes sense. I mean, otherwise, how else could you justify so much death and destruction in the region for the past 30 years, and even longer, as a matter of fact, that they don't feel like this could inevitably cause some backlash, right? It's just shocking. Like, it's shocking that this is his like true perspective, which is not so shocking. But it's shocking that he's openly revealing that this is his true perspective. I think a lot of these guys simply don't see the people from the MENA region as human, but it'll never not be shocking to me that they think this is appropriate to admit in public while on the campaign trail as a surrogate in Michigan. Dylan Saba says, what the fuck are Dems doing in Michigan? Racial messaging in U.S. electoral politics is almost never primarily about appealing to minoritarian interests and almost always about assuaging majoritarian anxieties. This applies across the political spectrum. BLM helped Biden win. And the Harris VP nod was effective, not because it brought in black voters, but because it provided coherent counter-programming to Trump's nativism for disaffected whites. It gave them a way to assimilate the racial antagonism core to the U.S. socio-political structure. Likewise, today's Democrats are doing racial messaging around the cause of empire, not to assuage its victims, but to quell the anxieties of its beneficiaries. In other words, they know they can't persuade Michigan's Arabs and aren't even really trying to. They're trying to persuade the rest of Michigan to ignore them. That's exactly what's going on. They're not throwing necessarily. They're simply saying like, you believe like, they're giving a permission structure to white people and to people who are not immediately related to Muslims or Arabs or anyone from the Levant and specifically the MENA region to feel in the same way that they do. They're like saying, no, it's okay. Of course, these guys are going to go and wreak havoc because our guys got killed and they're real human beings. The other side are not. They're just unfortunate consequences that just happen to be there. There's no other way to analyze like sending Richie Torres to Michigan. There's no other way to look at and interpret like what Bill Clinton is doing here. He's telling people that are neighbors with Arabs that see them as humans to not see them as humans. They're specifically saying that they don't You know, this is going to be the next. This is going to be the path forward. Yeah. Harris campaign first sent Rishi Torres to Michigan to antagonize Muslim and Arab voters. Next, they kicked out a Muslim leader out of a Detroit rally. Then, to finally top it all, they asked Bill Clinton to talk about how Zionism predates Islam. Great electoral strategy. That's it. That's definitely what it is. And they're still likely to win Michigan as well, in spite of all of this. And I think this plays a role in this. Like the kinds of the kinds of shit that you hear from the likes of the Democratic Party. When they talk about migrants and how they constitute a national security threat, you should read it in the same way. And I do. Does that make sense? Like when they lean in to the Republican Party's strategy, Republican Party's communication strategy that like migrants constitute a national security threat, something that the Democrats have never openly been on board with. At most, they've caved and capitulated to it on their legislative agenda as long as they get like some of their bipartisan legal goals across, right? There's always a push and pull there. This time around it's different. They're also consistently messaging that like, yeah, we're gonna do the border bill. I'm gonna be the border czar. I'm gonna be the competent administrators of these concentration camps. Like that's basically how Kamala Harris has packaged her side. And it's not about, I don't think it's necessarily about like trying to capture the attention of right-wing voters and, you know, trying not to instill fear upon them on an issue that they care about. And instead, I think it's something more nefarious. I think it is about teaching their own base of support, the Democratic Party's base of support, that like climate refugees are going to be coming, and you also need to have that hatred in your heart for them.
Here in the United States, we'll experience dramatic effects from climate, but they will be relatively subtle compared to the rest of the world. And the first part in this series of work that I've been doing has looked at those issues internationally. And so you mentioned North Africa, but the African Sahel region, home to 100 million people, is going to see some of the most dramatic changes in heat and water availability that will make it difficult to grow food and will likely drive many, many people out of that region, both first to Africa's cities and then perhaps north, towards Europe. And South Asia is the same way. And Central America, where a lot of my reporting has focused, is a lesser but prime example of a place where tens of millions of people are expected to bear a disproportionate brunt of climate change. It's going to get hotter faster. Their water resources will diminish more quickly. It's going to be increasingly difficult to grow food, and that is going to drive people out of those regions, and in the case of Central America, towards the United States.
You also need to feel like they are the other, so that when we do the Nazi shit, maybe marginally less Nazi shit than what Trump is planning, but when we do it, you don't get too mad at us. I think that they're training the Democratic base of support to accept right-wing framing on this issue. That's what I think is happening. That's why I've been so scared about the outcome of this election, regardless of who wins. Make no mistake, I do not think that like a second Trump term will look better in any way, shape, or form than a Kamala Harris victory. I do not believe that at all. I think that I don't want Donald Trump to win. But having said all of that, I do recognize what is going on. I see it with my own two eyes. I think that they are slow rolling the American public to be more receptive to fascist policies.
About the hardest issue here in Michigan is the Middle East. Hamas did not care about a homeland for the Palestinians. They wanted to kill Israelis and make Israel uninhabitable. Well, I got news for them. They were there first. Before their faith existed, they were there. In the time of King David.
Oh my God, Kaya picked up Bernie Sanders. Kaya, no.
David and the southernmost tribes had Judea and Samaria. So here's what I want to tell you. I'm going to do everything I can to convince people that they cannot murder their way out of this, neither side. You can't kill your way out of this. And they have to make a new beginning. But when I read that people in Michigan are thinking about not voting because they're mad at the Biden administration for honoring its historic obligation to try to keep Israel from being destroyed, I think that's a mistake. Because Donald Trump has shown what he wants.
I mean, how is that any different than what you want? like what you're just communicating, you know? Like that I don't understand. Like you're supposed to represent a difference in policy. Now, this is the other side of the story that like the American public still has their own opinions on this stuff. So while they are trying to condition a lot of liberals, like diehard loyalists to the party, into believing this shit as well, believing the same exact nonsense about immigrants and the same exact nonsense about Muslims, Palestinians specifically, there are still people who don't believe that. And they go, okay, well, what the fuck? Neither side represents my interests. So I'm just going to choose the side that is like offering me shit. Now, this election cycle, Donald Trump has not done that well enough in terms of like offering goodies to his base or trying to pick apart things that people might be interested in, wedge issues. He's slammed on the anti-immigrant sentiment far too much. He's not focused on what he would do in terms of the economy, fixing the economy. He doesn't even have a anti-establishment slant in the same way that he did before. So I think that's the reason why it's still a toss-up for all of the Trump administration's failures. And I think Bill was anti-migration in the 95 State of Union. Not to this degree, dude. What are you talking about?
But Kamala Harris has said that she will try to negotiate an end to the violence, an end to the killing, and a new peace process. And that ought to be enough.
The five-head jokey thinking here is that maybe Kamala Harris is expertly throwing out these like old white male carcasses, these flub machines everywhere to be like, see, this is what happens when you rely on old white men. You should vote for me instead because I'm not an old white guy. Donald Trump is going around telling Michigan Muslims he'll end the war and be the peace president and how pro-Muslim he is. Meanwhile, them sent Bill Clinton to lecture Michigan Muslims on how it's all Kamala's fault that Israel is massacring kids and killing civilians holding white flags. Whether or not they end up losing Michigan at this point, the Dems deserve to lose Michigan. Sheesh. It's not AIPAC, man. A lot of people are dumb to be like, this is AIPAC. This is just like straightforward, genuine Islamophobia directly tied to American foreign policy. Harris campaign surrogates, please stay on message. No history lessons, no jokes. Let's run through the tape here, gang. Genuinely blown away by how many fourth quarter fumbles they've been doing after giving the gift of the worst comedian on earth, insulting the electorate. All they have to do is shut up and preach unity and they still aren't getting it. This is Democrats. People should stop coping. I think that the Democratic Party's base is not as receptive to this message yet. That's the difference. The base is at odds with the campaign. The base is not at odds with the campaign enough that they will say, we're not voting for you, but the base is certainly at odds with the campaign. And I say yet because I think that they are trying to get people on board with the anti-migrant shit. They're trying to get people on board with the anti-Islam shit. I don't know, man. I still think the Dems have done the numbers. I think this messaging will get them the win. I think you're stupid if you think that like going to Michigan and routinely saying Muslims suck shit and deserve to die is a smart strategy when the 250,000 Muslims there have historically, post 9/11, voted for the Democratic Party by 70 to 80%. I didn't say it was smart, but I think they think it is. No, I don't think it's like, I think that they are petty for sure. They see Muslims as like spoilers in this process. But I think there is a tremendous amount of Islamophobia and a tremendous amount of resentment towards like Arab Americans amongst the Democratic Party. Yeah, Ryan Jerdusky, everyone's favorite Islamophobe, said there's a lot of talk about cannibalizing election day vote, but as of 10/29, 21.2% of Republicans who early voted had not voted in the last three elections, significantly higher than the 16.8% of Democrats who can say the same in Pennsylvania. Democrats don't seem anti-Islam, unfortunately bad on Gaza, but not on Islam overall. Oh, dude, stop. Why do you think the Democratic Party is trying to prepare the voter base to accept Nazi policy? Because they are going to do it. They are doing it. They're doing it right now in Gaza. And they are saying that they want to do it at the domestic level against immigrants. Liberals, unfortunately, without any sort of like ideological rudder to steer them in the appropriate direction, are simply always responding to fascist incursions. And they're responding by accepting the civility framing, civility to the fascists. The same way that coincidentally we just had 3 major publications doing piece on the inevitable war with China just in the last week. Yes, consent is being manufactured and Americans are absolutely absolutely going to be on board with a war with China. Are you kidding me? I mean, one of the most common attacks I get is that I'm far too pro-China, that I'm a CCP agent. It's just a sad state of affairs. But I do think that that is what we are moving towards. What about the fact that Trump constantly admires Netanyahu and tells him that he's not going far enough, and joking that Gaza would make good beachfront property? I just don't get it, man. I know what thems are doing is idiotic, but Trump will be the literal end, in my opinion. Brother, what are you saying? The Democratic Party is openly saying we don't want your vote. Like, what do you mean? I could repeat those lines every day of the week, but you can never outmessage the campaign. The campaign is openly saying, we will do this without you. We don't want you in our coalition. That's it. And they're kind of saying that to tens of millions of people that are directly related to undocumented migrants too. It's genuinely terrifying. The reality of the matter is there is no red line with Israel. Biden has proven that time and time again. He's shown no interest in restraining Israel, even if it's to the benefit of Israel continuing to be an apartheid state. That's where we're at right now. Anyway, on that note, I will see you tomorrow. I love you all.